Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon to all. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon or this morning to attend the key recommendations to combat ransomware. For those of you who joined early, we had some GoToMeeting slides on the deck, really detailing our latest promotion. Veeam and Assurance IT have collaborated to provide all Veeam existing customers a 1 VM, 1 terabyte, 1 year free promotion. No strings attached. We'll review the details at the end of the slides, at the end of the webinar, and we'll go through the details. Just give me a second here. We'll pull up the slides. Okay, so today we're going to be focusing on, again, the 3+ key recommendations to combat ransomware. The speakers, myself, Ernesto Pellegrino, Senior Solution Architect at Assurance IT. I am joined by Noah Gamache, Inside System Engineer at Veeam Software. So the table of contents. So just before we start, I'd like to go through some key housekeeping. So we expect the webinar to go anywhere between 35 to 45 minutes with some QA at the end of the webinar. Moderation, Luigi, who is your account executive, will be moderating the GoToMeeting. So feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get through them at the end of the webinar. And again, as I mentioned, offline, offsite storage is the most effective ransomware technique, and we'll showcase our pricing at the end of the webinar. So if we run through the table of contents, it's fairly simple. We'll go through the big picture, what ransomware is. We'll run through the key recommendations to combat ransomware. We'll look at what techniques are available and what are the best practices from a backup perspective. We'll look at remediation and recovery, what options are available within the tool, backup and replication, to help you recover from a ransomware attack. We'll also look at endpoint devices, which is new to Veeam, really how to back up and recover those endpoint devices that are not virtualized, Linux or Windows physical boxes, or any Amazon instances in the cloud or Azure. And again, like I mentioned, we'll run through the offline, offsite backup storage pricing just so you get a better idea of what that pricing may entail. So a little bit about Assurance IT before we start. Again, we're powered by Veeam, a Veeam partner, Veeam Silver Cloud and Service Provider. We're cloud-based. Our core business is cloud-based offsite backup and disaster recovery, fast and secure backup to the cloud. We extend your archives to the cloud, affordable and efficient cloud-based disaster recovery. And again, the goal of this conversation today is really safeguarding backup repositories from ransomware. Where are we located? We're based in Montreal in a state-of-the-art data center in downtown Montreal. 100% of our infrastructure is hosted at a secure facility in Montreal. Your data resides in Canada, and your data is managed by Canadian experts. So ransomware, the big picture. Really, what is ransomware? It's a type of malicious software which restricts access to computers and files on a computer until a ransom amount is paid. I think we've all heard about ransomware. We're all aware of ransomware. I think the key takeaway from this discussion or from this webinar is organizations need to be prepared. They need to have a plan in place really to combat ransomware and really provide the business with a couple of steps where we've tested and acknowledged a technique or a strategy really in case we get hit with a ransomware attack. So again, if we run through the numbers, the cost could be catastrophic, right? So these are the numbers as of 2014, 80,000 average cost of downtime, 90,000 average hourly cost of data loss. Two key points to take from this slide. is really, Veeam did a survey in 2016 to 877 organizations, and 46% of those organizations were faced with some form of ransomware in the last 2 years. The other key metric is at the end of the slide, 84% of those customers' response were able to recover data without paying the ransom. So again, the majority of the participants attending the webinar are Veeam customers in Canada, and you can see the numbers demonstrate that with an effective strategy, you can combat ransomware without paying the ransom. And we'll go through that a little bit through the slide deck. So ransomware, how to be ready, how to be prepared. Again, better safe than sorry. How to prepare for ransomware attacks. Well, here we highlight a couple of key techniques on how to combat it, right? One, keeping all your software up to date, and we'll drill down in the next couple of slides. Performing threat analysis from your security team. What type of analysis can we perform? Number three, train your staff on cybersecurity practices, not opening attachments, really educating your users to understand and know what to do when they see a ransomware type email or attack. Where we really focus on in this webinar is backing up all information every day, and we'll show you how and what are the most effective techniques. And again, backing up all information to a secure offsite location, which is key. So protection number one, patching. Keep your systems up to date. Software is still in maintenance. Do you have an upgrade plan? As you can see from the quotation, it's critical to have a patching process. So, there's different layers really, and the security layer is where we try to intercept and prevent ransomware, and this is key, a key part of your strategy really to prevent ransomware. So essentially, protection number one, or key recommendation number one, is really focus on your backups, your updating strategy and your maintenance plan, and keep your OSs, hypervisors up to date. Protection number two is protect your backup. Again, don't use user accounts for admin tasks. It's key. Use a dedicated account for your backup storage. So we'll drill down a little deeper into this, right? So a lot of our customers have Veeam backup replication installed on site. One of the best practices for backup or replication local instance is not using a domain admin account for your backup copy jobs or backup schedules. Altogether, another key recommendation is not to have that specific Veeam backup or replication server on the domain. In case there is an attack and it does access your user data, it won't have the right account really to damage or encrypt your data on site that you're backing up. And again, we can go that a little deeper if you like on a one-on-one conversation after this webinar. Restricting users effectively and air gap. Really, it's very important, and Noah will drill down a little deeper into this later on in the webinar, is how to have offline storage as a endpoint, or where you can create copy backup jobs offsite, and they're going to be offline really to protect in case your on-site data gets affected. Protection number three, education. Really educate your users. Educate them on how to not open attachments from unknown links and unknown sources, and inform employees on virus reaches that you hear or that are up and coming in the news or online. Protection strategy number four, and like I said, Noah's going to drill down a little deeper, but having an offline storage as part of your availability strategy is key. It allows your information to be offline and not vulnerable to ransomware attacks, and you'll have a strategy where you can rehydrate that data to your local production environment in case you get hit from ransomware. So at this point, I will pass the GoToMeeting to Noah, and he'll run through the slides. Noah, just bear with me. Noah, are you there?
I'm here. All right. So let's see.
Noah,
I
would you
might
like
have to
me to
get you to
run through
click
the
through the
slides,
slides.
Noah, or would you like to take over the slides?
Sure. Yeah, if you could click through the slides, that'd be great. Um, so today I'm going to be talking about the 3-2-1-1 rule here. This is a rule, philosophy, guideline that we like to preach and kind of follow here at Veeam as far as how many copies of your backups to keep, where to keep them, and some different rules just along those lines. Next slide, please. All right, so let's jump in and talk about mastering the 3-2-1-1 rule. First off, let's just define some of the numbers and what these actually mean. So the 3 here means 3 different copies of your data. And we're showing 3 different VBKs there. VBK is Veeam's proprietary full backup file format. So just having 3 different copies. That essentially one of those is typically your production copy, so the actual virtual machines or physical machines running your production data, an initial backup and or replica, and then a secondary backup and or replica. The 2 here means 2 different media types, and we will be sure to define this, but a good example that I like to mention, and that's kind of illustrated here, is a tape and a disk, right? And those could be 2 different media types. 1 copy of that data, which is off-site, so something like a copy off in the cloud, especially Assurance IT's cloud, right? We're talking about today. 1 copy which is offline, meaning that that copy cannot be accessed via the network. You cannot really reach it in any way. How can ransomware attack something that is not even attached? And then we'll throw the 0 on here. No errors after backup, recoverability, and verification. So this is a head nod towards our sure backup and our sure replica functionalities and the capability to test and ensure those backups are going to work when you need them to with Veeam. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about recovery, offsite, and offline types. So we have a couple different media types, and we can go ahead and just talk about the characteristics that kind of define these different types here. The first media type would be tape. Tape sometimes is considered as legacy or maybe old-fashioned, right? But really, I've seen a resurgence of tape in the last couple of years here. Tapes are beneficial because they are completely offline, right? When they're not being written to or read from, they're completely disconnected and no longer plugged in. The other kind of added benefit that's not mentioned here is you really can't beat the price of tape compared with disk sometimes. Replicated virtual machines would be the next media type. These are also powered off, and in most situations can be a different authentication framework. So an example would be VMware or Hyper-V hosts on different domains, right? Replicated VMs are a great option. A lot of times these are considered a DR option, right? Where you'll have these pushed off to a different environment and they're just sitting powered off, ready to be powered on at a moment's notice there. An added benefit of these is that it is a true one-to-one copy of your virtual machine and it's just ready to go, right? It's just as easy as powering on a virtual machine, maybe doing some re-IP or some network remapping and getting that VM back up and running. The next media type here are primary storage snapshots. So these can be used as recovery techniques and usually have a different authentication framework as well. Primary storage snapshots, I think of these when thinking about Veeam's ability to see storage array snapshots and our capability to recover from those a lot of the time. Very useful piece. They definitely do have their place. A lot of times these are crash consistent, and even though they are crash consistent, Veeam can actually recover at the application level out of these. So an example would be if I took a storage snapshot of an Active Directory machine, Veeam would be able to see that snapshot and recover down to the individual user or computer within that storage snapshot. Then we have Cloud Connect backups. These are not connected directly to your backup infrastructure and use different authentication mechanism along with different APIs here. Cloud Connect backups are very useful. The way we kind of get the data out there is through something called a cloud gateway. It's really just a single exit and entry point off into the cloud. Very useful there, and they definitely have their place as well. Then we have rotating hard drives or rotating media. These are typically external drives or something like that that can be taken offline when they're not being written to or read from. Veeam actually has a checkbox for this within our software. So as you're adding in your rotating hard drives, just be sure to check the checkbox that says this repository is backed by rotating media. Next slide, please. There we go. So let's talk about the different jobs to get your data offsite. The first job I like to talk about is a backup copy job. This job is assuming you've already done an initial backup to your repository. That's what we can kind of see on the left side in the production box here, is we have our storage here, A, B, C there. Those are kind of representative of our initial backups. Backup copy is going to scan that data, grab any of the change blocks based on the data that is in that repository, and then shoot those copies of the backup off to the cloud offsite. This job is really convenient and nice because it doesn't really touch production. Right, we're not going to touch your VMware Hyper-V VMs in this process. We're not going to really touch your storage array either. We're just going to scan that repository, detect the new change blocks, and then shoot them over to the other side. The other kind of neat thing about this is backup copies do synthetic fulls only, meaning that we will shoot incremental backup over to the other side, over to the offsite location, and then at the offsite location, merge those different incrementals together to create a full backup. So it's a very good option. Sometimes this is called replicating the backups as well. Go ahead, yeah, we can go to the next slide here. So let's talk about Cloud Connect for backup files. So in our example here, we're looking at a production site as well as the Cloud Connect service provider. So Assurance IT's cloud here. That little bridge symbol we're seeing attached to that cloud there, that is the cloud gateway that I mentioned a moment ago. And taking a look at this, this is essentially showing us that Assurance IT has their own Veeam infrastructure, all ready to go with a Veeam server. That's what that orange box in the top right kind of represents there. If something were to happen to your production site, you'll be able to recover out of these cloud backups. So very useful there. And just really nice to know that you have someone kind of on your side if you're to lose your data. You can call up Assurance IT, get them to help you out and recover as needed there. Let's talk about best practices and a couple more data protection tips. So more types and more frequent. So just on the very title of this slide, I always talk to potential Veeam customers about this as far as the philosophy and kind of thinking about backups and how to ensure that you're as secure as you can possibly be. The big thing is having more types of backups and doing backups more frequently, right? And there are really 5 different ways that we mention here. So storage snapshots of your VMs with the supported Veeam storage arrays. And you can find that list on our website. Some of those include Nimble, Pure, HP, 3PAR, NetApp, and there are others, right? Cisco, HyperFlex. But there are quite a few different supported storage snapshot types for our VMware VMs, and you can find that list on our website. The list of these is growing day by day here because Veeam has a universal storage API that we just opened up. So the actual storage vendor themselves can design their own plugins for Veeam. We just have to approve them on our end, and then they'll be able to hook in there. Replicated virtual machines. So these are those one-to-one copies of your VMs that are powered off. You can just power them on when you need to here. So that's also a very good option when we're talking about different ways to get that data off-site. Backup copy jobs. So taking a copy of the backup and shooting it off to another site here. We also talked about that in one of the previous slides. An additional backup job. So this is a typical VMware Hyper-V snapshot-based backup job within backup and replication, but we're just pushing this to another storage type here. Other off-site or air-gap storage, such as tape, right? And we did discuss tape a little bit already, talking about just having that copy that is truly disconnected from the network when it's not being written to, or read from. Let's talk about ransom remediation and recovery. So let's talk about some of the different types here. So there is something like Bitcoin, where you're just having to pay that ransom. No guarantee your data will be decrypted. So you're essentially just paying off this person, right, this malicious outsider, and saying, "Here's my money. Please go ahead and decrypt my data." And then you really have to put your trust in them, right? That you've now paid them off. Let's hope that they're going to go ahead and restore it, right? You could restore that compromised data from your backups. This is a great option, right? You're just going to lose data between now and the time your last backup ran successfully. And then, of course, you always have to think about contacting your local crime prevention or fraud field office. And we have a little website up there as far as that goes. So, how do we avoid this, right? How do we avoid paying the ransom or deciding to lose some data here? And really, we can avoid that by having a modern availability strategy, right? And those strategies include avoiding paying that ransom or deciding to lose that data. Both are incredibly unfortunate outcomes, right? So, we really don't want to have either of these things, right? We want to just avoid this at all costs. Ransomware hits. How do you know what's a good copy? This slide is talking towards Veeam's capability to test your backups, right? We have something called Sure Backup and Sure Replica that it can ensure your backups are going to work when you need them to. Something else that this slide I think is really pointing out here is that we have a lot of different copies of your data, right? We have backups running to tape here. We have backups running off site. We have the snapshots from our storage arrays. We have our replica VMs as well. We can use Veeam Sure Backup and Sure Replica with our on-demand sandbox to go ahead and test these different backups and ensure they're going to work when we need them to, right? Give us that warm and fuzzy feeling and that little bit of peace of mind that we will truly be able to recover when we need to here. Let's talk about the storage snapshots piece a little more here. So at the very kind of first animation here is we saw kind of just a big gap, right? Most companies, I think, run backups, nightly, right, around 8 p.m. or maybe even later. Once that backup is done, they're not going to run backups again until 8 p.m. the next night. So if something happens at 5 p.m., you're going back, what is that, like 21 hours, however many hours back to 8 p.m. from the night before to that most recent restore point. You're going to lose hours and hours of data. Using our modern storage snapshots, Veeam can actually look inside of those snapshots and recover. So we can recover doing instant VM recovery. So pull back an entire virtual machine based on the storage array snapshot. We can do file level recovery. So if we want to recover a file out of Windows or Linux, we have that option as well. We can also recover out of Exchange, Active Directory, SQL, SharePoint, and Oracle, right? So we can use our explorers and get really great recoveries as well. So it's kind of a nice thing, right? Because it's covering you more often, and then you get the capability to recover at really 3 different levels, right? Next slide, please. So let's talk about restoring. So when you restore, you have options, and you can choose kind of what level you want to recover from, right? So you can restore or run from known good copy of a storage snapshot, your backup target, your offline storage, your remote site, or cloud storage. So you have options here, right? Be that a storage snapshot, backup target, your tape, or from a remote site or cloud. You have different restore options depending on the media type your backup sits on. Really, the one I think that we kind of need to dig into would be the tape piece. You really have 2 options when restoring from tape. You could choose to take your tape backup and restore the entire VM into VMware Hyper-V. So take my full my full backup, migrate that data back into my hypervisor, rehydrate and grow my VM, or you can restore from the tape onto the backup repository and then do a granular recovery, right? Maybe you want to restore a file or something like that. From the cloud option, just depending on what you have out there, you do have some very good recovery options, especially if you're doing our replication out there. Next slide, please. There we go. So this slide is talking towards Veeam 1. Veeam 1 is a very useful tool. Veeam 1 is another Veeam product that is separate from backup and replication that is going to collect data from Hyper-V and VMware in real time. It's also going to collect data once a morning at 3 a.m. With this data, Veeam 1 can alert you on the different events, tasks, processes that are happening in your virtualized environment and lets you know if something goes wrong, right? So it'll throw up an alarm or an alert telling you, ring, ding, 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 you have a problem here. There's also the reporting side, which can generate PDF and Visio reports for you based on the data collection we're doing every morning at 3 a.m. There are some extremely useful reports, be that something like our protected VMs report, or maybe our under or oversized virtual machines report. This Veeam 1, in conjunction with backup and replication, can be extremely useful for keeping tabs on all things virtualization, be it VMware or Hyper-V, and all things backup and replication, be that the backup server, your backup files themselves, backup repositories, or really any piece of the kind of backup infrastructure as well. And Veeam 1 does have a free version, so please be sure to check that one out. So let's talk about endpoint devices and non-virtualized systems. So I've talked quite a bit towards VMware and Hyper-V. Let's talk a little bit more about our Veeam agents. We have our Veeam agent for Linux mentioned here. The Veeam agent for Linux has full functionality within backup and replication, meaning if you've paid for a Veeam agent license, you can enter that license into backup and replication, push out those agents from the central server, set up backup jobs, run those jobs, and then run recoveries all from that central console. So very nice as far as that goes. From there, you can also do backup copies. So if you need to push those Linux physical machine backups between sites, you can absolutely do that as well. We also have a Veeam agent for Windows, and we can see that mentioned here. Once this job or this Veeam agent has run more jobs, we'll actually see the last 7 backup types for those Windows backups, whether or not they passed or failed. So we will have you covered on the either desktop or server class OSs with Windows as well. So just know Veeam is covering the physical space now too. We're not just doing the virtualized space. And I'll turn it back over to Ernesto to finish it out here.
Excellent, Noah. Thank you very much. So, as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we were going to jump into some pricing and get an understanding of what the cost is for moving your data to the cloud. And again, Cloud Connect Backup is a feature that is fully integrated into backup replication. It's just another tab. There's no need really to spin up another application. It's fully integrated and it's one single pane of view for your complete availability strategy. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have for existing Veeam customers, we do have a 1 terabyte, 1 VM free promotion going on. So we've collaborated with Veeam to really provide all existing users 1 terabyte for free for 1 year. So again, we will be communicating the how-to at the end of the call, but it's very important really to understand how your offline strategy or what the cost is to move your data from your on-site repository to the cloud, really to prevent against ransomware. And feel free to reach out to myself or Luigi after the call, really to further drive through any pricing information or pricing details for your specific environment. Once again, need to really emphasize on backup. One of the most effective techniques is moving your data to Cloud Connect, and Assurance IT is here to help you run through that. Related links. Okay, so how do we take advantage of the 1 terabyte, 1 year, 1 VM free? Simply register for the offer at vee.am/free cloud services. Veeam will then provide you with an activation code, and go ahead and forward that activation code to info@assuranceit.ca. We also have some social media accounts where we would be able to reply and work with you in order to get you that 1 terabyte, 1 free for 1 year offer. So before we close the webinar, I'd like to turn it over to Luigi if there are any questions in the Q&A. What I'll do is I'll unmute you, Luigi. There you go, Luigi. Okay, so seems to be having some technical difficulties. So I'll run through the chats and we'll see if there's any questions.
There are actually no questions.
Oh, Luigi, okay, you're on. So there's no
Sorry about
question. I
that.
see one from Christopher here mentioning Veeam agent on Linux. Can this run on AWS instances? Is there any recoverability to different platforms like Hyper-V or VMware? Noah, I'll pass that one to you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one, Ernesto?
So the question from Christopher was the Veeam agent for Linux. Can it run on AWS? Is there any way to
Yeah,
recover that to Hyper-V or VMware from there?
yeah, absolutely. So the Veeam agent for Linux can run really anywhere. So be that a Linux machine running in AWS, Azure, some other platform, be it physical or virtual, doesn't really matter. And then your options as far as backup target, so where you're going to push the backups from there, are kind of limitless as well. Be that a something local to that machine, maybe a share that it has access to, or a Veeam backup repository. So you could target whatever kind of space you want as far as the where the backups land. Recovery from there. So with any of our agents, you have the ability to create what's called recovery media, which is really a bootable ISO. So you could create a bootable ISO for that Linux machine and then really spin it up anywhere, right? That you can create a virtual machine from an ISO file and mount that bootable ISO, which then lets you browse for the actual backup and then spin up a VM from that. So yes, it's definitely possible. You would just need to download the Linux agent on that box, create recovery media, and then push some backups out to whatever target, and then create a new machine using that bootable ISO. That is the recovery media.
Excellent. Thank you, Noah. Christopher, I hope that answers your question. And again, it is a recorded webinar. We will be sending everyone who participated or joined the webinar the recorded webinar by the end of the week. Again, you have my contact information, Luigi's contact information in the webinar invite. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions on how we can help you, how Assurance IT can help you protect against ransomware at any time. Well, thank you very much for your time and have a great afternoon, everyone.